The mesh order is used by the simulation engine to select which material to use when two materials overlap in the simulation region. For example, here I have a sphere made of material number 1 and a rectangle which is made of material number 2 and overlaps with the sphere in some areas in a 2D simulation. Also, from the geometry settings, I've given the sphere material a mesh order of 2 and the rectangle a mesh order of 1. Always remember that in the case of overlap between two materials, the material with lower mesh order will get a higher priority. In this example, the rectangle with a mesh order of 1 will take precedence over the sphere which has a mesh order of 2. The areas that overlap, in this example domain number 1, are assigned the material properties of the higher priority object, in this case material number 2. In the event that both overlapping objects have the same order, the mesh order will be inferred from the objects tree. Objects at the bottom of the tree will take priority over objects at the top of the tree.